sexual and domestic violence in rural communities from resistance to resilience. I'm Ashley with PreventConnect. PreventConnect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. So I don't know about you all, but I have definitely been finding myself holding my breath and carrying a lot of tension in my body. And so I'm going to take a moment to pause and just take a few deep breaths, breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth. And I invite you to join me. I know this is maybe a little bit different than what we typically do on a web conference, but I just want to take this time. So if you want to join me, let's take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to start right now. Okay. I already feel a lot better. I hope some of you do too. Also, meet my little pig, Panda. He's adorable. Okay, so for the time that we have today, we're planning to do the following. We're really hoping to look at the landscape of sexual and intimate partner violence prevention in rural communities, identify some of the challenges and opportunities for prevention in rural communities, and then be able to think about some of the considerations that we really need to take into account when we're thinking about what prevention approaches and strategies might make sense for sexual and domestic violence prevention in rural communities. And I want to start this conversation by pointing to a resource from CDC's Veto Violence called Violence Prevention in Practice. A couple months ago, we hosted a web conference with CDC and learned about how violence prevention in practice is really focused on helping practitioners take action to select and implement the prevention strategies from CDC's technical packages. And if you're following, if you're with us online, if you go to PreventConnect.org, you can find the slides for this web conference, and you can follow along with us that way. And if you are in Adobe Connect, you can see on the slide that there are various sections in this violence prevention in practice resource, and they include planning, partnership, policy efforts, strategies and approaches, adaptation, implementation, and evaluation. And today's web conference is relevant to a few of the phases of implementing a violence prevention plan, including partnership, strategies and approaches, and adaptation. So we'll make sure that you have a link either right now if you're online or following this web conference. We'll email you a link to the Violence Prevention in Practice website and the web conference that we did in case you're interested in exploring this implementation resource further. Right now, I'm going to invite Tori to introduce our guests and get us going on the real fun part.
Thanks, Ashley. We are so excited to have all of our awesome guests from all over the country joining us today. So we have Jessica Bender, who is joining us from the Family Refuge Center in West Virginia. We have Allison Price joining us from Rural Resources Victim Services in Eastern Washington. And then we have Jennifer Martinez from the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, and Daryl Harris and Monica Reina joining us from the Advocates, which are also in Idaho. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so excited to learn more from you. And because this web conference is focused on rural communities, and we know that rural communities are very different from each other and different between each other too, we asked our guests, but when they get started on their presentations today, to give us community snapshots. And before we ask them, for those of you who've been able to join us online, we want to know from you. tell us about your communities. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? And Ashley, as folks are typing into the text chat, because you live in a rural community, I want to know all of these things about your community. I know we've already seen your furry four-legged community members, but I think folks want to know a little bit more.
Thanks, Tori. Yeah, I do live in a very rural community. I think the population of my town is under 1,000 people. So just reflecting on these questions that you've posed to our audience, I see open space. I see a lot of cows and goats. I see my neighbors at our little tiny post office. I see wildflowers lining the county roads, old barns and mountains in the distance. I hear roosters and birds and mama cows mooing for their babies. I smell fresh air and also cow manure. Hay, and I smell pancakes from our little town diner. I taste the wild blackberries that grow along the roads, and I feel the warmth from the sun, a cool breeze from the Sacramento Delta, and grateful. That's mine.
That is so beautiful. And it looks like folks may not be able to type in the text chat, or they might be ruminating on these questions themselves. And for folks on the phone too, we encourage you to think about this. You know, how would you describe your communities using all of your senses? So thank you, Ashley, for walking us through your community. So we are going to dive right in and get started. So Jessica, I'm going to hand the controls over to you and tell us about your community in West Virginia and what violence prevention looks like there.
Okay, thank you so much. Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Bender. I work as the Community Coordinator for Family Refuge Center, and I'm really excited to begin my portion of the webinar by introducing you to our communities. We serve victims of domestic and sexual violence in Greenbrier, Mercer, Monroe, and Pocahontas counties, all in southern West Virginia. Our main office is located in Lewisburg. And a fun fact about Lewisburg and Greenbrier County is that in 2011, we were voted America's coolest small town, and we're still talking about it. So I'm not sure what that says as to how cool we are, but we are certainly passionate about our community. And that downtown area pictured here has several historical sites, some shops, delicious restaurants, and it's also the county seat, so it has our courthouse and law enforcement departments as well. And that's similar really to most of our counties. But as you move past those, much like Ashley described, we have a lot of farmland and also forest land. We're lucky to have many state parks, such as Mon Cove Lake, that's pictured here. So really a great time to get in a group of people, go out with your friends or family, or just get away by yourself. And speaking of being away from other people and things, we serve the very unique town of Green Bank, West Virginia, which is home to the world's largest fully steerable radio telescope. And so what that means for locals is that they are not able to use cell phones or Wi-Fi, even things such as microwaves or garage door openers, because anything like that that has a signal could interfere with the research that's conducted with that telescope. So when we talk about geographic isolation being an issue in rural areas, these people are certainly experiencing that. And because of the coal mining industry, it was once a really big deal in our area. So many communities are not thriving as they once were. So in recent years, there's been a lot of efforts to breathe new life into a lot of our crumbling infrastructure, such as the Princeton Renaissance Project in Mercer County. And that county is also home to Concord University, which out of 5 campuses in our service area, Concord is the only one that is residential. So all the others are strictly commuter. So that makes things interesting in terms of outreach and awareness and prevention programming with those populations. And so when asked what my communities look like, smell like, feel like, sound like, these were some of the things that I thought of that you can see now. We are very fortunate to experience all 4 seasons here in West Virginia. So a lot of times we spend our summers on the Greenbrier River. My personal favorite season is fall. So I like to be fireside with friends during those months. I included some pictures of food from those delicious restaurants I mentioned earlier, including pepperoni rolls, which were invented here in West Virginia. So we're a big fan of those. And then also just going out to festivals such as the Renaissance Festival pictured here, and also the West Virginia State Fair from my first slide. So I hope that you enjoy that introduction to wild and wonderful West Virginia. And with that, I'll get into the content of my portion. So I wanted to start with defining risk factors just as a refresher so we're all on the same page. And that is a set of behaviors or conditions associated with a greater likelihood of violence perpetration. So looking at risk factors for sexual violence specifically, this is not a comprehensive list, but just to name a few. On the individual level, we have exposure to sexually explicit media, prevalence of substance use, low educational achievement, and hypermasculinity, which is defined as the exaggeration of stereotypical male behavior. So there's an emphasis here on physical strength, aggression, and sexuality. Looking at the community as a whole, we do experience high levels of poverty, lack of employment opportunities, and we often see a general tolerance of violence in the community, as well as a lack of resources and social services. And then for the societal level, there seems to be a really strong adherence to some traditional gender norms and stereotypes that are tied to male superiority and female inferiority, as well as weak health, economic, educational, and social policies in our areas as well. And so that being said, as we look to special circumstances of rural communities, on the individual level, a 2018 study through the Domestic Violence Report of the Civic Research Institute showed that there were much higher rates of pornography consumption in rural areas, which of course is exposure to sexually explicit media, as opposed to urban areas. And so some of the research says that this could be because in a less diverse area, it may be difficult to openly engage with others regarding your sexuality, especially if one identifies as LGBTQ+, because of the discrimination that they are already facing. And so we can use this information to educate teachers, officers, and parents on the importance of quality sex education, education that includes consent and information on healthy boundaries, because we know that our youth is getting this information from somewhere, and we of course want it to be accurate and helpful as opposed to potentially harmful. So we've even partnered before with educators such as health teachers to provide programming in conjunction with their sex education lessons. And then regarding substance use, the CDC's 2017 report of overdose deaths found West Virginia to have the highest. We had overdose deaths of about 50 per 100,000 people. So in our community, this has been something that has really hit us pretty hard. And what we found is that many business owners, organizations, and just general community members, they really want to help in the epidemic and lend efforts to that cause, because almost everyone knows someone who has been affected by this. So we can use this as an opportunity to educate others through trainings and resources on the role that violence plays in substance use to those who may not have otherwise made a connection. So we know that substance use is a risk factor for violence. We also know that a survivor may use substances to cope after abuse. So, for example, the picture here is two of our advocates, Emily and Tyranda, and they set up a table with information and resources at Healing Appalachia, which is a local event to spread awareness and raise funds for this crisis, again, to make that connection. We also have what we call the Good Old Boys Network here, which is a term that's used to refer to a network of most often white men who have been born and raised in a community and often know each other. They also hold prominent positions of authority, which those are few in a rural community. And a lot of the times this includes within the criminal justice system. So we know that this network often relates to themes of the hypermasculinity and the general tolerance of violence, like we mentioned. So The Bureau of Justice also says that less than half of violent crimes, which include sexual assaults, were reported to the police. And two of those top reasons is a lack of anonymity, which we know is very difficult in a rural area, but also the belief that the police would not believe them or wouldn't do anything to help them. And we feel that this can also be tied to this network as well. So we know that close relationships between those in our communities could be harmful. However, if you can get someone on board with your mission from one of these departments, that could be beneficial because others might listen to that individual if they really respect them and they have that prior connection. And then finally, there's an emphasis on keeping matters behind closed doors because that same report found that a third of the victims said that they simply dealt with matters in a personal manner rather than involving law enforcement. So a focus on education and awareness within our entire community, of course, is very key because, for example, if we can learn to stop treating sexual topics as taboo subjects, we could potentially cut down on some of the shame and silence that's involved in sexual violence. So an example of this is our former men's outreach group has held the event Conversations After Dark, where we invited a panel of sexperts. And these people included a pastor, an OBGYN, a human sexuality professor, and more, just to openly discuss and answer anonymous questions about sex in a neutral space. And that event went very well, so it's something we certainly hope to continue in the future. And then as we look to the community level, sorry, I was experiencing an issue with my slides for a moment. We know that rural America has a greater level of poverty than the nation as a whole, and their lack of employment opportunities just simply because there's not as many businesses here. And again, many employees might hold positions simply based on who they know, because we see that a lot in small towns. We also have a high alcohol outlet density, and research varies on this topic, but related to this, studies have found that there is a higher alcohol consumption in rural areas, specifically among our young people. So similar to the sex education, we can partner with programs and have that educate on alcohol use to discuss things like when consent can and cannot be given under the influence of alcohol. And then again, that lack of resources and services. So studies show that rural women are about twice as likely to be turned down for services as a survivor in an urban area because there's an insufficient amount of programs. They also might be experiencing inadequate staffing or just barriers faced in accessing these services. It could be their geographic isolation or a lack of transportation as well. And then finally, on the societal level, we do have that strong rural patriarchy and a general tolerance of violence, which again can be tied to that good old boys network and many other factors as well. Considering geographic isolation, about a fourth of women in rural areas live more than 40 miles from their closest domestic or sexual violence agency. And that number is 1% of survivors in urban settings. So there is a huge difference there. So again, creating awareness of our services, we know that it's so important. And so what we've done is we quite literally meet community members where they are. So this means having a presence at health fairs, festivals, any community events where people might be coming out to. So pictured here also is our elder abuse advocate, Deneen. She was at a recent health fair and she was able to share information on all of our services, including her elder abuse program. We also recently tabled at a local showing of The Greenbrier Ghost, which was a play at a local theater, and it tells the story of a domestic violence victim. Because again, any tie that we can make to that violence is an opportunity to educate others on what we can offer. And lastly, under societal, I included gun ownership because that's much higher in rural areas than in urban. And unfortunately, this correlates with higher rates of femicide. So here in West Virginia specifically, I can speak from personal experience that many of my family members own guns because hunting is quite popular. And we certainly aren't saying that simply owning a gun would make you more prone to perpetrating violence, but we do know that it can play a part in the dynamics of it. So our former youth activities coordinator here, he worked closely with a local veterans group because they were working on providing suicide prevention information and resources to veterans since they face higher rates of suicide than the average person. And so this proved to be a really good partnership because he could provide information and education to those in that population too about our services and programs as well. And so then just some key strategies for prevention. When assessing your community, I'm a really big fan of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank's website. They are so great. I would encourage you to Google that. You can search their site to find information such as the percentage of those in your community who are living in poverty, the amount of individuals who hold a bachelor's degree, or the amount of single-parent homes. This information is really good to have when you're convincing others of the importance of violence prevention programs, because unfortunately, not everyone gets that at first. So if you can take that information to them, it could be really helpful. And it's good for you to know as well. You could also use it to evaluate if you've been doing a program for a while, because they update it pretty regularly, like about monthly. So that's something to consider as well. And then your statewide coalitions, I just wanted to give a shout out. We have the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence in Charleston. We also have the West Virginia Foundation for Rape Information and Services. As our statewide coalitions, they are really amazing, and they're great places for information and resources, including local statistics on the prevalence of violence in your area. So that's something that could be useful for you as well. And then lastly, of course, you can ask your community members. So unfortunately, I've often heard from counselors or teachers, well, bullying isn't a problem here. But it does give an opportunity for me to ask, well, what issues are you facing? And how could we help you with those? And so engaging your community, of course, that knowledge is power. So, you want to know your agency, who you serve, and what you can provide. And also that assessment information, like from the reserve site I just mentioned, having that could be really beneficial because, again, if you can show that these populations are at risk for violence, then people might be more open to that. And again, meet them where they are. So not even just on location, but on shared values as well. So pictured here, we have our Wolf Wagon Walk event where we partner with our local Humane Society. And we do this every October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month because we know that pet abuse often occurs alongside domestic violence in a home. And we've certainly found that people seem to be more open to speaking with us and getting our information if puppies are involved, especially if working with the Humane Society is something that they're already involved in and they're already passionate about. Because ultimately, whether it's substance use, mental health, or saving animals, most of us are all, striving for a healthier, safer community. And so a few last notes on creating change with your prevention programming. Of course, it's good to have a clear objective of what you want to change, who you're going to target, who needs to be involved. Of course, knowing these things will help you choose the program best fit as well. And you can keep your partnership strong by showing appreciation for the involvement and showing up to their events as well. So pictured here is a program I conducted with the Summer Drama Camp at our local theater that I mentioned earlier. We have a program here called Act It Out, where there are skits that teens can act out and then follow up with discussions. So it worked really well because we have this ongoing partnership with the theater. And then also the students were able to practice performing, which they were there to do, while also learning about how to respond to acts of violence. And finally, celebrate your successes. So, of course, share what you've learned with others. Be open to hearing what's worked for them. We know that our communities are very unique, and what works for one might not work for the other. But we also know that word of mouth can travel fast in a small community. So you can try to use that to your advantage and make the greatest change that you can. And with that, I think that would bring us to our next chat question.
You are right, Jessica, and thank you so much for giving us that tour of wonderful, wild West Virginia and giving us some more information about what's worked for you all with your key strategies in prevention programming. I think it's so great to learn about how, when you're working in rural communities and looking at preventing violence, it's not just you're preventing sexual violence. You're connecting these dots to all of these other health and community safety issues, like you had mentioned with the opioid crisis, or, if teachers say, like, hey, this isn't an issue here, then that gives you an opening to talk about, well, what is an issue and how does it connect to sexual and intimate partner violence and how can we help? So thank you for sharing all of that wisdom with us. And I want our audience to have an opportunity to, if you're on the phone, think about it, jot it down. If you're online with us, answer in the text chat. How are you using community-specific risk and protective factors to inform your prevention efforts in rural areas? Really focusing on the community-specific part. I think we are all very familiar with what the risk and protective factors are on an aggregate, but when you look down to, with the community that you're working with, what is specifically impacting them that you all can use in your prevention efforts? So I'll give folks a little bit of time to type that in, and feel free to keep typing as we move forward. We'll summarize and revisit the questions in a minute. But now I want to give Allison an opportunity to tell us more about Eastern Washington and how Rural Resources Victim Services has been able to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence. So Allison, it is all yours.
Hi, y'all. My name is Allison, or Allie Price, and I'm so excited to be here online with all of you, even in the midst of all the turmoil. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about my agency and where we're located. So I work for Rural Resources Victim Services, and I'm the Community Engagement Program Manager, which means that I oversee all of the outreach, education, prevention work that we do. We're located in Eastern Washington State, so not Seattle. We're about 6-7 hours from the west side of the state. So we're located in a really, really rural area. We serve 3 counties, Stevens, Ferry, and Lincoln counties. And all 3 of them are extremely rural. And you can see, if you're online, some of the pictures that I've chosen to represent those communities. So we're really heavily logging, mining, agriculture, as many rural areas are. Those are all areas that are in many ways in decline. So we have a really high rate of poverty within our communities. We also are home to 2 tribal communities, 2 tribal reservations, the Colville Confederated Tribes, as well as the Spokane tribe. Let's see what else I want to say. We have a really strong kind of anti-government, very patriotic community, which really plays into a lot of the dynamics that we need to address. We tend to be pretty conservative, very family values, kind of family-oriented. So we've had to get pretty creative with some of the prevention work that we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our largest town in all 3 counties is about 5,000 people, and everything else is pretty significantly under that. So you can see I included a picture of Main Street, one of our main streets. And we're also home to a nationally, unfortunately, renowned community called the Marbles community, which is a designated as a Southern Poverty Law hate group based on some of the rhetoric that they have, very kind of white supremacist, anti-government language. And so, we have had to get, like I said, really creative with how we engage folks within that community, as well as outside of that community. So that is a little bit about Eastern Washington State. So our programming, we are able to implement primary prevention programming of both sexual assault and domestic violence. We've had to get really creative, and one of the ways that we have been able to do that is that all of our prevention programming is arts-based. So if you can't see the slides, it says art is not always about pretty things. It's about who we are, what happened to us, and how our lives are affected. And that is a quote by Elizabeth Brown. And we found that to be really true here. We tend to engage mostly youth, although we do have some adult-oriented primary prevention programming. And we found that by using art or having every activity that we do center art in some way, that has really been universally accessible for everybody. You know, we have a really diverse population here in terms of academic achievement. Many of our students are very far below grade level in terms of reading, writing, comprehension, and so we can't use a lot of boxed prevention curricula that we otherwise would, but we've found that art is something that everyone can do and can participate in to some degree. We've also found that this has been a big gateway to getting into school districts or boys and girls clubs because, you know, we live in such a rural area that the school districts don't have always the funding for some of those extracurricular programs like art, music, you know, anything kind of outside of academics and sometimes athletics. And so we found that by being able to come in and say, hey, you know, we will fund essentially doing art programming for your students who otherwise wouldn't have access to it, and we're going to slide some prevention in there too, we found that has been a really big bonus in getting us connected with the school districts. So we use a pretty loose definition when it comes to the types of art, and I think that that's really important for those of us who live in rural areas and don't maybe have access or need to be pretty creative with our budgets and the types of art that we're able to connect our cohorts to. So we have done everything from kind of your traditional drawing, painting, pastels. We've done block and screen printing. We've done poetry. We've done dance and other body movements, ceramics and pottery, music, cooking and baking, slam poetry, sewing, call and response, just a variety of different, you know, you can really be as creative as you want to be with how you incorporate that into your programming, which is very helpful in a rural area. We also, because we are fortunate enough to serve 2 tribal communities, one of the things that we have found is the importance of doing culturally specific prevention programming. And so we developed a primary prevention program called Huschout. It's the Salish word for having a good spirit or being a good person. And it's essentially primary prevention through decolonization. And so what we do is we essentially fund culturally specific activities and programs while weaving primary prevention initiatives in. So, for example, we might bring in a facilitator or help facilitate classes on sewing wing dresses and ribbon skirts, and then we might also talk about traditional gender roles and gender stereotypes and how we can kind of break some of those things down. What we found is that, you know, especially for Indigenous communities, the importance of decolonizing and bringing back some of those traditional and cultural activities directly influences the rates of violence, the rates of drug use, rates of poverty, et cetera. So we have done a variety of different culturally based programs. We've done and supported naming ceremonies, jewelry making, I mentioned the wing dress and ribbon skirt, sewing, gathering medicines, creating tobacco bundles, sewing moccasins, cooking classes for traditional foods, a lot of different activities. We are also able to really incorporate a lot of cross-generational community building in there as well. So, you know, connecting younger folks with the elders of the community, making it very community oriented, having women's circles, you know, having men's circles, et cetera. And that has so far been extremely effective, especially in a rural area where there's no other way for a lot of those students to get to have access to those types of activities and that connection to their culture. So one of the things that we really had to do in order to enable prevention programming to begin with is we had to put a lot of effort into creating some marketing materials in order to increase our legitimacy and our buy-in in a community that otherwise is pretty skeptical about any type of prevention. You know, we're talking about folks that don't even want to admit that domestic violence or child abuse or sexual assault even exist. And so, you know, we do need to be pretty creative with the types of information that we are putting out there. And what we found is that when we don't provide that narrative or we don't give folks access to that information, especially parents, we found that folks make it up and they inevitably come up with something that's way worse than what is actually happening. And then we've lost control. And as many of you know, in rural communities, everybody talks to everybody and rumors can spread pretty rapidly. And so we, this last year, put a lot of effort into creating materials that could be handed out that were accessible to the average community member, that helped explain what we were doing in a way that was non-threatening, that didn't necessarily mention, you know, those kind of trigger words like sexual violence or domestic violence, that really focused more on the positive, protective skill building around primary prevention. So one of the ways that we did that is we created an FAQ. And I've included examples here of our Hush Out FAQ. But we have an FAQ for every single prevention initiative that we do. We intentionally pass it out to parents, to teachers, to interested community members, whoever. So we explain, you know, who we are, what the program is, kind of what topics we cover, why we want to cover those topics, and then really what our goals are and how to get a hold of us. But again, we do that in language that is accessible. We try to have it targeted around 8th grade reading level. So it's not intimidating or off-putting to most folks that would be reading it. And again, we just really focus on the positives, you know, creating healthier community members, focusing on emotional intelligence and healthy coping skills and healthy communication and boundaries, rather than, you know, we want to prevent rape. Like that's really off-putting to a lot of people. So that has really, really helped. We've been able to dramatically expand our capacity and get into almost every school district in our service area, which previous to that we were only in 1 or 2, and now we're in like 12 or 13. So that was a really big bonus for us. And it, if you are interested in kind of looking at that or looking at that template, I'm happy to send any and all of the marketing materials that we have out to folks. And it looks like Ashley has also included a link in the chat box. So some of the other ways that we developed buy-in to our programs, since we do mostly work with small school districts, is we found topics that had overlapping risk and protective factors and really highlighted those intersections. So similar to kind of what Jessica talked about, you know, it's a really big conversation right now in our area around mental health or gun violence or, you know, youth violence, bullying. And so we were able to really identify for folks and lay out all of the overlapping risk and protective factors, like, hey, we can kind of, kill two birds with one stone by coming in and doing this prevention programming. It's also going to aid in, any mental health issues that students might be dealing with, or bullying reduction or things like that. We also really try to focus on the positives of student or youth participation. So we really frame it as opportunities for community service, something that folks can add to their high school resume, even things like, work experience that they wouldn't necessarily get otherwise in a rural area with limited opportunities. And then we really focus, like I said, on the positives of the work that we're doing. So we want to talk about creating healthy and productive community members, as opposed to implying that, students are potential perpetrators, or, that we want to prevent rape or child abuse, or those things that are much more loaded for folks. And then we have worked to maintain that administrative buy-in. So we followed the same cohort whenever possible, and that has been really important in terms of data collection. We do a ton of data collection. I would highly recommend, if you're not doing that, to definitely start doing that, because we have then taken that data and we've compiled it in an attractive, readable, understandable format. And we can then share that with anybody that's interested. Again, you're really reducing kind of the mystery of the work that you're doing, and you're able to share that with folks. We also collect some kind of unconventional data. So one of the things that we track is we track attendance data, because we found that in one of our school districts where we were doing primary prevention programming, we saw a 60% increase in regular attendance on the days that we were in that high school providing prevention programming. In fairness, we bring donuts, so that might have been part of it. But that was huge when we were able to show other school districts, hey, look at this massive increase in students through the door. That's a really important thing. And that's really the bottom line for a lot of our school districts, is how are we getting kids even in through the door. We also just kind of maintain constant communication. So this might seem like a little bit of a no-brainer, but we're constantly asking for follow-up meetings. We're asking the teachers and the administration, did you see anything? Have you noticed changes in your students' behavior? And what that's also enabled us to do in building those relationships has enabled us to then kind of pitch, okay, we're working with the students, but hey, what if we could provide trainings and prevention programming for the teachers and the administration and the parents? And so we've used this really as a jumping off point to reach kind of that community saturation. In rural areas, most of the community is in some way connected to the school districts, whether they're employed there, whether their kids go there, everybody knows everybody. And so what we found is kind of by getting into those schools and maintaining that relationship, we've been able to build on that and really create a high level of prevention saturation throughout our communities. So that is what I had to share. Ashley, I'll turn it back over to you now, I suppose.
Thanks, Allison. This is Tori. I'm on Ashley's account. I know it's what we're doing today. So thank you so much. That was so great to hear about how you have been able to both get buy-in and sustain the buy-in, and how the way that you go about both building partnerships and buy-in and prevention really depends on the community that you're with. And that's exactly how prevention should be. I think that was really, really palpable, especially when you were talking about the prevention through decolonization work that you all are doing. And then again, with maintaining buy-in in the schools, where if you're in the schools in rural communities, you're not just reaching a majority of the youth in your community, you're also reaching so many adults because they're employers too. So it was really great to learn more from you, Allison, and thank you for sharing all of that. So we do want to give the opportunity for folks on the phone to think about and take notes, and on the computer to be able to answer in the text chat. But we want to know, what ideas do you have for developing community buy-in in rural communities in your area? You just heard a great blueprint from Allison, how she's been able to get and maintain buy-in in Eastern Washington, or I'm sorry, no, yes, East, okay. I know my directions, in Eastern Washington. So what ideas do you all have? While you all are thinking about some of those, I do want to thank Kayla and Crystal for your responses to the previous text chat question about community-specific risk and protective factors. So Kayla had responded, we partner with local rural alternative schools to provide on-site advocacy and prevention education curriculum. And Crystal responded, we provide advocacy groups and outreach at the schools and colleges. Deviant SA advocates give presentations on many topics to spread awareness and education. We have outreach office hours and partnerships with the library and law enforcement. We have Hmong advocates that do a lot in their community as well. So it sounds like folks who are able to reply in the text chat have found a lot of really great ways to connect with their communities, to learn more about those specific risk and protective factors. So thank you to everyone on the phone who's thinking this through, writing down their notes, and thank you to everyone on the computer who is typing into the text chat. So we want to turn it over to our final group of guests, our Idaho team. So thank you for joining us. So we're going to hear from Daryl and Monica about their community in Idaho in just a moment. But before we hear from them, Jennifer, I understand that the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence recently released a really great resource for folks working in rural communities. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here with y'all today. I apologize that I can't, virtually connect with y'all through chat. Been having internet issues over here for sure. So I just wanted to go ahead and say welcome. Thank you for being here amidst everything that's happening kind of in the world and in our country and in our states and communities. We did recently release a new youth campaign that's focused on not just how do we provide resources and responses and services to young people, but really what are some of the resources that we can provide as well in assisting with prevention so that young folks don't have to experience any form of gender-based violence as they're, going through school or in their communities or any other instance where they might be exposed to it. And for us, a lot of it is collaborations. How do we have intergenerational collaborations to prevent and end teen dating violence specifically? So if you go to our website, which I wish I could type into the chat box, but I can't, it's engagingvoices.org, or you can just Google us. We have a lot of resources available in terms of how friends can support friends experiencing teen dating violence, how healthy relationships should look like, where to go to get help if you do experience something, and they're all available for free to download, or we can ship them to you. But I guess what I really want to focus on in this moment before I kick it over to Monica and to Daryl is kind of talking about why the Idaho Coalition kind of really focuses more on prevention and what that looks like in a rural state like Idaho. I'm based out of Boise, which is like the most non-rural part of the state, but I grew up in rural Idaho, and that's kind of where my roots are. And so one of the most important things I think for us to remember that we kind of elevate in all of the materials that we put out and the images that we put forward, the posters that we create, is that rural communities are not homogenous. And if you could advance to the next slide, because I can't actually control anything, that would be great. Rural communities are not homogenous. We often think that rural communities all look the same or all experiencing the same thing, but even in places like Idaho, we have a lot of diversity, a lot of different communities that are existing, that are living there, that are experiencing different forms of violence. And we often don't think about that, or it's a last-minute thought or an afterthought, especially within young folks. And so we really are focusing on how do we create meaningful access for underserved youth. So for us, in everything that we do, we center the community that's the most marginalized, that's the most impacted, not because we don't think that everyone deserves to be centered, but because if we're centering those who are experiencing the most violence, then everyone will benefit from the resources that are created as a result from trying to serve those communities. If we could also advance to the next slide. One of the most important for us is collaboration. As a coalition, we want to hear from the programs constantly on what it is that they need. Also want to hear from young people themselves, like what are they experiencing? What are they going through? Are the things that we're creating even working? Is it something that they're using? If it's not working, what specifically about it isn't working? And so really focusing on intergenerational collaboration from the very beginning, right? From the planning process, from the creation process, all the way until products are developed. And then having young people also help us kind of deliver those messages, right? They are going to go to each other first before they go to an adult if they're encountering some situations. So what are we doing to prepare young people as much as we can so that they can know when to go to an adult, where to go to get help, where can I get more resources if I am experiencing something or if a friend is experiencing something. If we could go to the next slide. One of the things that we also really want to elevate that we try to provide for programs and for other folks as well is an awareness of policies and protocols. We know that every community is different. School districts are going to allow different things to come forward. Title IX and all of these different federal policies are also something that we have to take into consideration with any of the work that we're doing, specifically with young people. And so for us, being able to provide as much expertise as possible or getting information for programs who, are at capacity most of the time with providing direct services and response is something that we take really seriously also. So just being aware constantly of things that are changing so that we can provide support in that way. And the last thing just touching on is that there are successful collaborations can look different. Success means something different, I think, in every community and in every different state, every organization. But the reason I really wanted to make sure Daryl and Monica were highlighted here in this section is because they do some really great work in the part of Idaho that they're in. And I don't want to take up any more time from them, but I do want to, I wanted to make sure that there was a program that was providing direct services that works directly with young people in a really amazing way to show how they're able to make their collaborations with young people in a rural community work. And again, like you mentioned at the very beginning, we have resources that are created from the beginning with input and direction from young people here in Idaho. And all of those are available for free. Again, things might be a little bit on pause right now just because we're all social distancing, but you can still download and access those materials online. And like I said, I'm sorry I can't type it in there, but the website is engagingvoices.org, and you can kind of see the new campaign for this year. The images you're seeing are from our last year's campaign as well, and so happy to answer any questions folks might have. Throughout the presentation or afterwards, feel free to email me, but I want to make sure Monica and Daryl have enough time, so I'm going to stop talking and kick it over to them.
Thanks, Jennifer. Nice to hear your voice.
So Daryl and Monica, your first slide of your community snapshots is up and ready whenever you are ready to get going.
Great. This is Daryl. Monica and I both work for the Advocates, and we're located in central Idaho. We live in the Wood River Valley in Blaine County. which is located in the heart of the central Idaho Rockies at the edge of the Sawtooth and Chalice National Forest. We're almost entirely surrounded by U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management lands, and the valley's heart and energy is the Big Wood River. Next slide, please. Baldy Mountain. Whoops.
Sorry, I was just going to let folks know that Adobe Connect unexpectedly quit on me. So those of you who are still able to, please hang on for a second. But everybody else has the slides in front of them. So Daryl and Monica, keep on going.
Okay, thank you. Baldy Mountain rises over 9,100 feet and watches over the town of Ketchum in the center of the valley. And it's a testament to our town's resilience. When mining died in the late 1800s, Ketchum reinvented itself as a destination resort. Now the Wood River Valley is known for outdoor activities like hiking, mountain biking, cross-country skiing, fishing, as well as snowboarding and downhill skiing. Here in the heart of central Idaho, we celebrate our pristine sky as an essential part of our heritage and a treasure to be preserved. As a result, we live in America's first international dark sky reserve, which allows us to easily see the Milky Way and the vast array of stars in the night sky. Next slide, if we can control these. Wildlife here is abundant. Our morning commutes are often slowed and even stopped by herds of elk on the road. A herd of white-tailed deer made themselves at home in the field by my sister's house this winter, bedding down for the entire winter. We have a cougar roaming in the neighborhoods, freaking everybody out, and people are keeping their small dogs in close proximity as a result. We also, last weekend I had a giant moose literally standing on my back patio soaking up the sun. We have next slide. We have a very rich Peruvian and Basque cultures with annual festivals of traditional games and food and dance. And last but not least, in the fall, sheep are relocated from the North Valley to the South Valley where the winter months are warmer. Again, huge numbers of sheep cross the road. They may interrupt our morning or afternoon commutes as well as the elk. We have 4 very distinct seasons. Winters are really long and cold and snowy, and summers are hot and never long enough. And the spring and autumn months are spectacular. Okay, next slide. Are we all on the same slide here?
We are on your slide that has the text that says the advocate's mission is to teach people.
Great, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to take 5 minutes and I'm going to focus on the strategies that we use for prevention education access into the schools. I'm just going to give a 7-point outline of the strategies that have been successful for us and hope that you all can use some. We do have an established presence in all of our local schools from elementary to high school. So here's how we got our foot in the door. Number 1, we found that most of our local schools do not want to talk about violence prevention at all. So the first thing we did was reframe our conversations with school administrators from talking about teen dating violence and sexual assault prevention to talking about bullying prevention and healthy teen relationships. So a workshop on teen dating abuse became a workshop on healthy teen dating. Simply reframing how we talk about what we do opens so many doors. Number 2, secondly, we align our prevention education programs with the social emotional learning standards of the school district, along with the results of the Idaho Youth Behavior Risk Survey. So I literally sat down with our superintendent with the district's social emotional standards and the youth survey in hand and showed her where we can fulfill requirements, we can close gaps, take the lead on specific learning standards, and address specific issues on the risk survey. Taking some of the onus off the school district to make sure those standards are met secures our place in the school. Number 3, we meet with the superintendent, principals, and social workers every year to remind them that we're here, show them what we can offer, and ask how we can help. Every fall, we send an email to all teachers, reintroducing ourselves and the advocates, Oh, we could go to the next slide, sorry. And the advocates outlining what we do and what we can offer in their classrooms. For example, to elementary school teachers, we offer workshops on how to stay safe if adults are fighting. To middle school teachers, we offer workshops on technology and healthy relationships, boundaries and bullying. And to high school teachers, we offer workshops on sexual harassment and consent, just to name a few. Number 4, offering community service hours has been a great way to engage schools for us. We offer volunteer community service hours to students in middle and high school who need to fulfill requirements. Also, we make ourselves available for schools to refer students who get in trouble and need community service hours and mentoring. Right now, we're working with a 17-year-old boy who made inappropriate comments to some of his female classmates. He comes to our office for 2 hours a week to do research on how sexual harassment impacts survivors. And because he's now kind of invested in prevention, we've been seeing a huge change in him. Let's see, number 5, we could go to the next slide, please. Engaging parents has been huge for us. We schedule talks at PTO and PTA meetings. We facilitate community talks about what we're doing in the school. And we rotate time in coffee shops to facilitate a once-a-month hot topics conversation with parents and community members. This way we learn what their concerns are for their students and we help address them. For instance, many parents are very concerned about technology, so we added technology to all of our Healthy Relationships curricula. Number 6, we will do anything, and I mean anything, to connect with students and their schools. We mentor students on their senior project. We help facilitate the Pride Club at Wood River High. When a school only gives us a half an hour in front of students, we take it. We know that a half an hour isn't ideal, but we see it as an open door to connect with students and faculty. My coworker, who's going to talk next, Monica, literally chaperoned a high school trip to Boise a couple of weeks ago, and Monica doesn't even have kids. So seriously, if they asked us to be the lunchroom monitor, we would do it. And number 7, perhaps our most impactful strategy is to hire teen interns, and Monica is going to go into detail about that in a minute. And before she does that, I just want to sum up some of our strategies. You can go to actually probably the last slide now. I keep forgetting to ask you to change them.
You're on Together We Can End Violence.
Thank you, perfect. So to sum it all up really quickly, frame the conversation with school administrators in a way that allows you in the door. Build relationships with administrators, teachers, social workers, and parents, and align prevention programs to social emotional learning standards of the district. Offer support wherever you can, mentoring, community service hours, even chaperoning field trips. Engage parents. When parents are on board, they will champion your cause in the schools. Be flexible and be available. Even if what administrators ask you to do is not exactly within your mission, it's really worth it in the long run. And finally, engage young people in your work. Look to them to inform your prevention strategies and programs. Now Monica is going to talk about our teen intern program.
Great. Thanks, Daryl. And thanks, Jen. So hi, everyone. My name is Monica Reyna, and I'm the violence prevention educator at the Advocates and the Every Teen Counts, or ETC, supervisor. So as Daryl mentioned, we'll go on to the next slide that has the description of the ETCs, please. The ETCs are a group of paid teen interns from across the Wood River Valley. They are healthy relationship peer educators and influencers who inspire teens to use their voice, stand up, speak out, and create positive cultural change. And they do this through peer education, awareness campaigns, and healthy relationship events. And I really do have to give props to Daryl and my predecessor, Heidi Cook, who really built this amazing program over the last 7 years. So as folks may know, young people experience dating abuse and sexual assault at higher rates than older adults. Yet very few will reach out to organizations like ours or even to a trusted adult. So reaching young people is essential to our prevention program. So 7 years ago, we asked for a grant from our community to begin our first group of ETCs. Why did we choose a teen leadership model? We can move on to the next slide. So we believe that young people from the community most affected by abuse should not only have a seat at the table, but also help build the table. So the program is all about recognizing youth's inherent dignity and autonomy, and it values and centers their experiences. We also know that when a young person experiences abuse or assault, they will most likely reach out to a friend. Teens listen to other teens when it comes to accessing resources and setting expectations for relationships. And so we are so grateful to the Idaho Coalition for championing these ideas and providing a lot of support and training in our state around these ideas. Next slide, please. So at its start, the ETC program looked very different than it does now, but growth has been steady as we increased our own organizational infrastructure, as we got street cred, we can't call it anything but that, within our community and youth, and found additional sources of funding, and learned lessons and got more training as a prevention team. And even though we've been through a lot of changes, there are some key features that really keep this program successful year after year, and that's what I'm hoping to share today. So first, it is a paid position. We believe that if we're utilizing talent, time, and expertise, we must compensate our youth. And for those of you that are wondering, it costs about $1,200 a year for an awesome ETC who is never sick, who always says yes, and who stays over the summer. So by investing time, training, and money, we are centering the long-term whole human development of our youth. And if your program can't fund entirely with money, find other ways to communicate the value and worth of youth's work. This could be small stipends, food, I'll say it again, food, food and good food, community service or volunteer hours, social capital like writing a letter of rec, or adding it to their resume. Celebration is a huge way to value work, or any mix of these. So providing compensation has been a key element of the ETC program's success. Also, hiring interns is a peer-to-peer interview process. Youth in our valley know their peers better than we do, and we interview every student who applies. The ETCs provide a lot of insight into who will be influential or thrive in the position. At the same time, we make sure to train ETCs about hiring youth with diverse lived experiences across ages, locations, and social groups. The peer-to-peer interview process is both a training opportunity and an opportunity for them to gain ownership over the program. Also, the ETCs sign a contract and confidentiality agreement and review all other hiring materials that the advocate staff looks at. They also take a tour of our shelter and transitional housing. Our contract includes student-defined learning outcomes for the internship, which you can see up on the presentation. And we also spend a lot of time training on what each expectation looks like. So this mutually developed agreement is the foundation for the internship. It's what we keep coming back to. Next, I would say it's really essential with a group like this to create the space, and this can mean a lot of different things. First, create the physical time and space. So for us, we meet every Sunday for 2 hours in the evening, and this is the time that we get the most work done. Due to sports, theater, work, music schedules, Sunday works best for our students. And even though it may not be ideal for my schedule, it is really worth the accommodation. Making the space can also mean creating space for the students. So that means doing a lot of prep on the supervisor end and growing your facilitation skills. I've grown so much doing this job. And really, Adult Allies' role in meetings are to build safety, share knowledge about prevention and social change, and model effective team tools, communication, and norms. And finally, we can go to the next slide. Find the why. Connect students to the mission of your organization and their why for doing this work. We practice these out loud and often. It is huge. Students who are truly passionate about this work will thrive in their positions. We focus on education as a key to ending violence while also addressing the larger factors that perpetuate dating abuse, bullying, and sexual violence. So in summary, and you might all hear this as well, young folks in our community will often tell you there's nothing to do. By hiring youth, we meet the needs of our organization and meet our community's need to invest in our young people. We answer the question, what is there for me to do? How will I get job experience? How will I make it into such and such school or into such and such job? The ETC internship is about connecting them to their own power. Learning and teaching with the advocates gives young people the tools, connection, and knowledge to know that the cycle of violence can and will end with them. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Daryl. And thank you, Jennifer, for sharing all of that great information. And I really love what you all ended on with, you know, not only are you providing an essential service for prevention and for survivors, but you're also setting up systems within your community that can really impact some of those community norms or just the community climate where there are things for youth in rural communities to do. There are ways for them to get that necessary job experience or volunteer experience before they graduate high school and potentially move on to higher education. So really, really great to hear about the work that you all are doing there. We wanted to we have about 10 minutes left, so maybe just a few comments from each of you all. What are some challenges or opportunities that you all have identified unique to rural communities? So all of our presenters, just feel free to chime in with those. I know some of the things folks have mentioned previously have been about, you know, how do you plan for access issues like transportation or Monica and Daryl, you had both mentioned having food and having good food. So how do you, you know, knowing that a lot of folks are using state or federal money for their prevention, how are you all overcoming some of those challenges with just basic accessibility issues?
This is Monica. That's a really good question. I think about, getting people physically to your space for the ETC internship. We are meeting centrally at the Advocates and also providing food. So I think, we've looked into collaboration with our local hunger coalition. So if we have any youth that are in a certain category of being food insecure, they have opportunities where they distribute food locally. And I think it's also just been a matter of really finding the commitment and carving out those line items of transportation and food.
One of the things I can add to that, this is Daryl, is that we have actually a really great public transportation system here, and we collaborate with them, and we can get free bus passes for students to travel up and down the valley, and that's been huge for us.
That's awesome. I think that collaboration and unlikely partnership is really crucial for folks to be able to imagine how they can adapt in their rural communities. So we also want to know who are your usual partners and what challenges and opportunities present with those. So if anyone has a quick response to that or just advice for partnerships across rural communities.
Sorry, this is Daryl. I wanted to talk about collaboration. I just didn't have enough time because that is key for us. We have a lot of collaborations. We collaborate with the community library and do book clubs with adults and students. We collaborate with the local animal shelter. They shelter animals for people who are coming to shelter for free. We have a formal collaboration with juvenile probation. So if we have a student in trouble, we can work together to help mend whatever's going on. We actually collaborate with St. Luke's Community Center for the Center for Community Health, and that's been a great collaboration. So we reach out. That's been a real concerted effort of ours, is reaching out and collaborating more and more with people and other agencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is Jen. I kind of want to add on to, from a coalition standpoint, how our collaborations have evolved over time. We still partner with some law enforcement agencies and judicial systems, but we've tried to move away from that a little bit more because our focus is on, like our theory of change is centered on the last girl, right? The person who's most oppressed, most marginalized in our community. So we've really made an intentional effort to build relationships with community-based organizations that are working in immigrant communities and documented communities, with organizations that are centered on the LGBTQ plus community as well, and kind of everything that traditionally we hadn't really been partnering with, but who we felt we had to develop relationships that were meaningful and that were sustainable so that we could ensure that the services we were providing and that the information that we were putting out was also able to be accessible by people who are experiencing violence at higher rates than the mainstream community. So we've really evolved who are some of our partnerships are and trying to sustain some of our more traditional partners at the same time. Sometimes there's tension within that, but because we focus on the relationship building as a primary component of it, I feel like we're able to address hard conversations when they come up and figure out how to move forward together from there.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's so great to hear about the different partnerships for prevention that you all are engaging in and how those are so diverse across the state of Idaho. I know we heard a little bit of this from Jessica and Allison earlier, and feel free to chime in if you have other key points or notes on this, but one of the common themes that I heard from across all of our presentations on this web conference today is that in order to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence within and beyond rural communities, it's so important to be connecting to other community health and safety issues like opioid abuse, mental health, resiliency. Do any of you have any, last key takeaways around that necessity to connect to other issues across the community? Well, with that silence, I'm just going to assume that everyone said exactly what they wanted to say earlier in the web conference. I know it was really great for me to hear about how folks in Eastern Washington are using art to improve mental health and to prevent sexual violence, and how folks in West Virginia are being able to address both the opioid misuse and abuse crisis and sexual violence at the same time. So really being able to not only connect across risk and protective factors of sexual and intimate partner violence, but being able to connect to other issues that are really impacting our communities. So in these last few minutes, we would love for folks on the phone and folks on the computer to answer one last text chat question, and that is, how will you advance sexual and intimate partner violence prevention in your communities? And I want to thank Rebecca and Kayla for answering our last question about developing community buy-in. Rebecca says, we found snacks are very successful when trying to develop community buy-in. And Kayla says, we help facilitate mentoring programs, bystander intervention programs, and teen living classes for buy-in. So it sounds like there's some great partnerships going on in Kayla's work. So Ashley, some folks are pondering this last question of how will you advance sexual and intimate partner violence prevention in your communities? After listening to this web conference today, what inspiration do you have for folks?
Well, gosh, you know, I have to say that I was really looking forward to this web conference, and I'm just so thankful to the guests that we've had today, that we've been able to hear from. And, you know, I think that there's definitely a lack of conversation and a lack of resources around prevention in rural communities. And so I think I'm inspired, you know, to, number one, not have this be the one web conference that we do with this focus, but really continue to explore some of the successes and challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the really, you know, exciting work that's happening across rural communities, and also just, you know, really taking into account, I think someone said this earlier, that rural communities are as diverse as any other community. And so, yeah, there are like similarities that we can draw from, but we also have to be, you know, really driven by our communities, even if they are rural, in the strategies and approaches that we choose to implement. So I think that's what I'm walking away with today, Tori.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So, Ashley, the time has come, and I am showing folks who have joined us on the computer your lovely thank you slide. So, are you ready to close us on out?
Yeah, you know I've been emailing with a lot of people over the last 90 minutes. And so, you know, sincere apologies to everyone who had issues with technology. There's lots of things I could say about that. I was in the same boat. So if you did listen over the phone and download those slides, you know, thank you so much for doing that. And for the folks who were able to join, thank you. Again, thank you to our guests. I'm just so inspired by everything that you shared. And Tori, appreciate you so much for carrying us through this. I'm thinking of all of you, you know, in community. We're dealing with a lot of things right now. So I just want to extend my thoughts to everyone. Thank you for sharing some virtual space with us today. We will see you soon. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but one of our presenters just answered in the text chat. Jessica says, I had an issue with my mute button, but I'd like to add regarding the connection to other health issues. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, is a current buzzword in West Virginia, and I think it speaks to the importance and addressing so many of these issues we talked about today. The science is really showing the importance of addressing all of these concerns together for the health of our youth and our adults. So thank you so much, Jessica, for putting that in the text chat for us.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. All right, well, we have come to the end. So thank you all so much. This was recorded, so we will send an email out when the recording is available. We will also create a document of all of the links that were shared. If you weren't able to get those, we'll create a document so you can get the links. And yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. So take care, everyone. This will conclude our web conference for today. Thank you.
Thank you.